people were dancing between takes and like everyone's sort of whistling like the songs and everything. Like they get stuck in your head, but in like a good way. Like the crew like bought into the energy. So it sort of helped make it you feel like you were behind the scenes. And that was, I really liked those days that we were doing Vegas shows, or even like the tour around America. It was just like they were doing these really quick costume changes, and then he'd sort of do the concert and then we'd run off and then we'd do it again in a different costume. Like, it was just so much fun.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Ruby, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on. And with everybody I have on the show, before we get into what's happening now, I like to go back to the very first moment that you saw something, watched something, like something sparked the creative side of you. If you remember that very first kind of creative spark, what was it for you?
I feel like for filmmaking, there was this show in Australia called Puberty Blues, which was very like Skins-esque, but set in the 70s Australia. And that director did so well with showing emotions in a really believable way that I felt like I wanted to start making films and start showing emotions through a visual medium like that, through directing, I guess. So that was when I sort of realized that was a job, that you could create moments from real life and show them to other people. And it just seemed fun, and he made it really special. So that was the sort of the moment I decided I wanted to do film.
And how old were you around that time?
Maybe 16.
Okay. Okay. And so did this like practically play out instantly? Was it like now I'm running around with the camera and trying to do something? Or was it something where it's like, I'm just gonna sign up for film school when I get out? Like, what was kind of the effect it had on you?
I was in photography with some of my friends at the time. So I was doing sort of still frame storytelling back then. And then I ended up going to art school, fashion centric in London. And I remember in my first year, I was like, oh, maybe I should have done film school. But I talked to a few people and they were like, it's totally fine to come in from a different angle. And my work, I feel like, is a little more fashion centric, like that's sort of the stylization, the aesthetic that I like. So I think it actually was a nice way to marry the two things I'm interested in, is to study theoretically how to make fashion imagery and then to practice it on other people's productions, I guess is how I started out. So it was nice to kind of have an angle to come in to work with people.
Well, I know like photography is super helpful going into cinematography because you're thinking of framing and like there's a lot of crossover between those two things. With fashion being another element that's extremely visual, like how does that affect what you're thinking about when you're shooting? Because, I know for myself, like I'm not fashion minded, so when I'm shooting, that's not something that's crossing my mind. How does that affect how you're, shooting, or what decisions you're making behind the camera?
I think it helped me find a personal aesthetic because I felt like I was honing in on other imagery that I liked, and it helped me find my eye. And I can do things that aren't fashion centric as well, but I just think the composition and the color treatments that I like tend to go hand in hand with fashion media. Like even my photography, I think like the framing and the sort of, without going to beauty aspect, I think there's sort of a way that fashion media presents itself, and it changes all the time. But it's just a different scope, I guess, of finding stylization versus like environmental portraits. Even I feel like I kind of lean into a sort of fashion centric way to frame and light and everything like that.
How do you balance stylization versus like realism? Like you mentioned, when you're
Mm.
shooting, especially for some of your work, you're shooting on locations or you're doing behind the scenes stuff, but you're also doing these very glamorized, poses that are ending up in magazines. So like,
Mhm.
how do you balance like actually showing what's there versus crafting an image?
Yeah, interesting. I think on film shoots with actors, they're sort of a little more attuned to creating moments like that feel less crafted to an audience. Whenever I shoot with real people, like I work in commercials here and everything, and sometimes it's like the actual head of the company that I'm taking a photo of who's not comfortable in front of a camera and who's saying, like, you have to tell me what to do. Like, sometimes they feel a little bit awkward in front of it. And I always tell them, which I've gotten good feedback from, I always tell them to like almost create an alter ego and you have to play a part. And it sort of helps you remove your own self-conscious of like, I don't really smile like that, or I would never be
Yeah.
like typing and smiling like this in my office, like, and it helps them sort of move away from that stock image posing because it's almost like it's not them. And it's like you can sort of embody like the head of the company you want to be in 5 years, or it sort of helps them find a confidence and helps them remove their own, not doubt, but I guess there's sort of like a hesitation or a little bit of a like you're wearing the wrong size clothes feeling when you're photographing people that aren't used to it or working
Sure.
with people in interviews and everything. So I always tell them to like try and play a part. And I think that helps ground facial expressions. I think it helps ground their movements. Um, and I think that takes away sort of the clunkiness of setting up a scene. And actors do that already. So on set, it's sort of fine. But that's always my advice when I work with people that aren't used to being photographed and it's going to be like blown up on their company's site or something. And they're like, oh my God, so embarrassing. And it's like, no, it's fine. Like this looks good because you're playing a part.
Yeah, I love that idea of like embodying the person you're going to be in 5 years. I'm going to steal that from you because I think that
Yeah.
is it's something I did an exercise like 2 years ago, and um, it was like kind of it was a little woo-woo manifesty, kind of thing, and they had you write a letter to yourself at the end of the year, like basically saying
Right.
congratulations on accomplishing these things. And I don't get into a lot of practices like that, but that specific thing of going like, hey, it's the end of the year, congratulations, you did this, 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 and this, it gives you this confidence going through your day to day where it's like, I'm living like that person to accomplish the thing that I want to
Yeah.
accomplish. But I love that in kind of the micro of doing a photo shoot and talking to somebody. I'm definitely going to steal that next time I'm filming with somebody.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's super effective.
well, I got to ask you, kind of stepping practically into this world. There's so many different opinions within the photography world, within cinematography world, about film versus digital, like all of these different things about how to do this the right way, which is usually just the right way is the person talking about it. For you, talk to me about your kit, like when you're walking out, like I'm always carrying these 3 items with me, like this is my non-negotiables when I'm going to a shoot or going on set to take set photos.
I primarily shoot digital. I learned to shoot on film, which I actually think was a really good way to learn photography because I feel like when I walk on set and there's some horrible lighting situation or like art department thing where you're like, oh my God, someone's going to be like in a silhouette if they want the background like in the photo or something like that. I think knowing how to manually adjust the camera and not just lean on it auto
Yeah.
adjusting has been super helpful. So I'm glad I got that background. And same with Photoshop and everything, like the burn and dodge tools. Like I'm glad I learned that practically um, to transpose into my digital work. When I leave my house, I shoot on a digital Leica here that can do video because sometimes I have to roll for people. Um, so I bring my digital camera. I do have my mom just lent me her M6, but I haven't bought film for it yet. But I'm really keen to use that one because I haven't used film in years. And then uh, I usually don't bring my own lights. Usually production, I work with DPs if it's a motion shoot. So I'll just move around what they have if I need to. But I guess like good for a kit is like having like white fill, white bounce and like black fill is always nice to like sort of help uh, adjust what you're working with without being like, oh, the lighting's like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah. Are you swapping lenses quite a bit, or do you just have one lens you're rolling with all the time?
I just got a camera a couple months ago and I only have one lens that mounts onto it, um, which I think is like 28 to 75, something like that. I usually don't like shooting super wide. I don't usually shoot wider than 35, and I sort of lean on portraiture. So I feel like 50 is, I sort of prefer the look of that. Um, but 50 to like 90 is probably my favorite for portraiture, but obviously there's some situations we have to be wider. Um, but yeah, I've never shot wider than like 28, I think.
Yeah, I noticed that looking through just your work. I was like, this all feels like 50 to like 75 range.
Yeah.
And I like it because there's a lot of really cool layers, especially looking through like the Elvis behind the scenes. Like there's like these really soft foregrounds and backgrounds, and then like this one point of focus that's really eye-catching. Um, I have to ask it really quickly. You mentioned your mom
Yeah.
lending you a camera. So your mom is in the industry, which is something
Yeah.
that it's rare when I talk to people. Usually it's like my parents were doctors and they really didn't want me to go into film, because they didn't think it was a real career. And, so it's really cool talking to people whose parents are, one, creative and understand that world, but two, I have to imagine it can be intimidating having an accomplished cinematographer as your parent while you're learning to be a cinematographer and photographer. It's got to feel like, I don't know, making dinner and your dad is like Gordon Ramsay, it's like, it's got to be a little bit intimidating. Did you feel that pressure like growing up where it's like, I don't even want her to see what I'm working on? Or was it kind of a mentorship where it's like, what do you think about this? And very collaborative in that sense.
Yeah, it's funny you said the Gordon Ramsay thing. My dad is a chef, or he was a chef before
There you go.
I was
Double
born.
whammy.
And he is like in the kitchen, he'll be like, curl your fingers back, like he is. But both of them are they want to like share what they do with me. And I'm an only child. Um, they got married in their like late 30s. So they were sort of like, uh, they were very much sharing their lifelong passions with me growing up. Um, and I think I never particularly wanted to be a cinematographer. Um, I do like photography and directing, um, but cinematography, I think, has always been something that I liked her telling me about, but wasn't something that I wanted to do. And she's very generous with sharing information, and like we run things by each other when I'm doing my own shoots and everything. Like she's very supportive, but also careful not to over help me when I'm doing things. Like obviously I can ask her advice. I'll be like, how do I fix this problem or things like that. But she's always cautious that she doesn't shoot my stuff for me because she was like, I don't want it to look like I made that film or like that was my decision. Because when I work with DPs, obviously because I have like such a background of living with a DP, but uh I do like being involved in that element. And I think she just doesn't want to seem like it's like she's taking credit for my ideas or just from like a viewership perspective that it's her work that I'm like trying to take credit for. So I've always worked with like up and coming DPs and everything that I've met. Like now, the my friend that shot the last two films of mine was like a B cam operator who got bumped up to be Splinter Unit DP on Elvis and got to do like Mad Max like action unit and stuff. He's a really talented DP. His composition's amazing, and we work really well together. And he sort of trained under my mom, so I guess it's a nice way that we sort of speak in the same visual language, and we like the same aesthetics, and we communicate really well. So we've had a good time working together.
Yeah, that's super, super cool. Um, yeah, I'm curious when you're looking at collaborating with somebody, because especially coming from photography, which is so much a solo thing. You can be the fly on the wall somewhere and grabbing amazing photos that obviously there's other people involved in, putting a set together. And like there's elements there that you're obviously leveraging. But as far as the actual act of creation, it is one of the few things you can do purely by yourself. It's like painting or other art forms like that. When you're stepping into a collaborative effort with somebody who is now your DP or who is now, an actor, and you are trying to manage all these different parts, like, is it difficult to go from, okay, this is my vision to now let me take some input from my cinematographer who obviously I picked because they can do this with an eye that might be better than mine or might, they may be thinking about it in different ways than me. How do you branch out and start taking everyone else's kind of individual talents and, collaborating in that way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really like working with people that have their own ideas. And I guess it is like being the photographer or the director on a shoot, like you're sort of captaining a ship. And I like people to be self-sufficient in a way where I can tell them what I'm looking for. I show them like very specific references, and then they can go off and do their own research. And then I love hearing when people come up with their own ideas, especially DPs and costume designers, production designers. I want to work with people that have good ideas and I want to set them up to succeed. And we're all on the same boat, like it's sort of, I like that people can contribute and they feel really proud of what they're doing and they have room to experiment and research and do their best work in this realm of what the photographer or the director is creating. Like I feel like there's a through line through all the departments communicating with me and putting the environment together and putting the bigger picture together. That's really fun when you have people that are coming up with their own ideas and are doing their own research because they're obviously going to stumble across things that I would never stumble across. And it's like, that's so cool. That's our costume. Or like, that's so cool. That's the lighting color treatment we're going to do.
Well, you have a new film, a new short film coming out in February. What were some of the big inspirations behind it? If you can talk about it,
Yeah.
what are some of the biggest inspirations or things you're thinking about going into that?
Yeah, where I pulled some of my Elvis coworkers. So it was like the director's assistant and the costume designer, production designer's assistant, and the splinter unit DP, and the someone that was working in the composing department. They're all sort of young, up and coming people, and they're all really talented. So we're working with this executive that produced my last films, and we decided to do an animation, a children's horror that's very Corpse Bride, Coraline, which is for me that's very up my alley because I feel like that's fashion centric.
Yeah,
That sort of
definitely.
yeah, that like stylization of being scary without leaning on gore or violence or jump scares. I think that it's going to be really fun. And our references for the visuals have been really cool. We're just getting our concept art back now for the character designs, and there's like a monstrous little boy, kind of ghost-like figure that we're having a lot of fun designing.
Is it, when you say animation, is it like hand draw animation? Is it like stop motion, like the films that you reference? Like what's the visual style?
It's virtual production 2.5D. So right now it sort of looks like The Sims. And then they're going to flatten it to a more of a 2D style with a bit of depth. So it's going to end up looking like Into the Spider-Verse style, use the
Very
same
cool. Oh,
technique. And it gives us a little more liberty to play around with the cinematography and the production design because you're not locked into a shot. You can kind of look around at this stage.
I'm interested in animation like you described. Like I've really enjoyed,
Yeah.
like, Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse and these very unique kind of styles. I've gotten really tired of the just kind of basic 3D animation.
Hmm.
I understand there's an art form behind it, but it's just something that animation has kind of just looked one way for a really long time. And so now you're getting these really breath of fresh air projects that are making me interested in that kind of genre. So I'm really excited to check that out when it comes out.
Yeah.
What's been the biggest thing? I know you said you're just kind of in previs right now. Like, what's been the biggest thing you're already going like, this makes me nervous?
Two things are jumping to mind. The first is how prepared you need to be in prep. Uh, like my cinematographer and I had to block out every single thing, and it's almost harder when you can do anything because when you show up to a location, there's obviously parameters that you can't shoot from that direction because there's a wall here or there's like sort of restrictions. And with this, they can work around any restriction. So having blank slate to do whatever you want is daunting. And then the other thing I've realized that I need to focus on that I'm not used to is that people can't be still in the background. Like every character needs to have like a fluidity to them, that they're not just like frozen in the back, but then they can't be like fidgety in the back. Like there's such an art. But I'm talking to some of my friends that work primarily in animation and they're obviously much more attuned into that. But I'm like, what are they doing in the back? Like I have to like really get in that character's head right now to figure out what they would be why they wouldn't be like stock still in the background.
Do you feel like starting with film has kind of helped you in terms of like patience and being very economical with what you choose to shoot. And then stepping into animation, like, do you think that's something that's helping you? Like when you say there's a blank canvas, you can kind of sit down and go like, if I was shooting this practically and I could only do this, I'm going to take my time and really choose these shots.
Yeah, that's such an interesting connection. I think unknowingly I work like that. And I don't love going back and forth about things. I like being pretty sure beforehand. Obviously, there's nice moments you can discover at the time, but I'm always pretty sure what I want beforehand. So it's been, uh, yeah, exactly like with film, like the sort of like a surprise before the day where you're hoping all the ducks in a row and there's going to be something that's not, and you have to work around it. And sometimes that makes it even better than you thought because you came up with a really clever solution and it made a better visual than if you would have planned it and got what you wanted the first time. Like, those sort of happy accidents where you had to like make a split second decision and then it ended up being really unique and cool. And it was like, oh, I wouldn't have thought to do that because I had no need. Um, so yeah, I think definitely that premeditation. I think the style that we're working in right now is technology they're developing for live action to be able to visualize like a pre-visualization system. So I'm glad that's sort of like why everyone I'm working with is from live action. So they're all sort of keen to learn right now how to use these tools and how to like communicate with people that operate the tools on something small before it gets integrated into big productions.
Right. And you're happy to test it out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I get lessons. I get like these little crash courses from people that are so interesting and so they're really taking it slow with us and like making sure that we're grasping it so they're not like taking the wheel off us or anything.
Oh, that's super cool. I have to ask you about Elvis, because the movie, I would say, had some cultural impact when it came out. First, I gotta say, like you mentioned, when you can do anything, that having that discipline and being able to control that, in a way is, and it instantly made me think Elvis, because when I sat in the theater, all I thought was like Baz Luhrmann is, if he takes his hands off the wheel at any second, this whole thing goes off course, because it is like there's this level of insanity to it. And all of his films are like that. Moulin Rouge is like that, where it's like if a different filmmaker tried to have this much frenetic energy in one movie, it would explode and it wouldn't work. And Elvis obviously works all the way through. But I have to ask, on set, to me, it was stressful. Like I was watching, I was like, I don't know how you edit this movie. I don't know how you shoot this. I don't know how there's this many locations. But then you see behind the scenes, like you've posted, where everyone's dancing and having a good time. Like, was it always like that? Or was it this like very Stanley Kubrick, like, everyone be quiet, we have to do another take of this? It's, like, what was kind of the energy on a set like that has a massive budget, a large amount of big names working on it? Like, what was kind of the energy around the camera?
It was very much dancing behind the scenes, fun set. And I think that's a credit to Baz that he does run a really fun set and he makes your job feel important to you. Um, so it is like a nice, because when we do long days or their night shoots or something, and people sort of start flagging energy wise, and he's so good at making everyone have fun while we're working. So it was like being at a concert and hanging out with Elvis and the Memphis Mafia. Like they did and because they built everything so practically, it was like being there. So
Right.
it was fun. It definitely wasn't high intensity. Everyone be quiet. It was like we're shooting a concert. Like it makes the camera move more. Like you're at a like it was fun. Everyone leaned into it. Everyone had a good time. You buy into the fun, and it is fun.
Were you there from day one? I mean, because I've seen pictures from makeup test, or were you in and out throughout the production? Like, how are we there from like beginning to very end?
I actually signed up to do like a data wrangling job on that movie. I didn't sign up to do stills or anything, and then they got Leica cameras to use that were manual. So I was showing that one of the director's assistants asked me to give him like a crash course on how to operate the camera. And then it was during a hair and makeup test, and he was like running around. So he's like, "Do you mind shooting a hair and makeup test?" And then the director was like, who took these? Like, you can take all the hair and makeup tests. I did all the costume tests as well. Um, and then once production started, there was like a fashion photographer, Hugh Stewart, who's like a big deal. He's like a, you know, a hotshot photographer. And he couldn't be on set for the first 2 weeks. So they were like, oh, can you come on and cover for him while he's not here? And then when he came, I thought he was going to be like, you know, like get out of my way or something, or stepping on my toes. But he asked to see my photos. And then he went to production, was like, we shoot really differently and get really different stuff. I think we should both shoot. Uh, so overall, I think they had, including myself, they had 4 photographers coming in and out. I think I was the only one that was there every day because I was like doing my other job at the same time. And then they had me do another job in editorial, pulling still frames from the video footage because they liked the select cells making. So I was doing about 3 or 4 jobs on that film, and I'd come home and finish it up because I wanted to make sure I like covered all of them properly, and I knew I could like do some stuff from home on the computer. But yeah, I went in and shot every single day
Wow.
on set, and then they had Hugh was there like most of the time as well. Hugh's a really cool photographer. He shot like a little wider, so that's why I actually leaned into the portraiture lenses, because I was like, well, that'll just like guarantee, even if we're standing in a similar spot. Like there's a lot of the scenes where we're hiding on set, and like we're just walking around with the camera operators and everything, being like, if I'm here, can you see me or am I good? And sometimes we had to be in the same spot, or we'd be like ducking under cranes and everything and being like, there's a good spot here for the next take. Like, you should jump in here. So we worked really well together, Hugh and I. And we're sort of joking, it's like war photography, because you are like literally hiding and ducking and like trying to get out of people's way while you're looking at what you're doing. Yeah, I don't think there was a day that I didn't go on, but there may have been. I might have got caught up with something one day. But yeah, I was there from beginning to end.
So you just didn't sleep for months, basically, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
You had your own Colonel Parker just propping you up and say, you got to go back out
Yeah.
there. No, that's super cool. And as far as photos, I mean, how many photos do you think that you took over that
Ooh.
course of time?
Yeah, I think at least like 5,000 a day. Just because it's sort of like snap, 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 snap. And then I'd just go through them that night. Um, and obviously some are better than others. And some of them were lucky, or it's like I wouldn't have taken that photo.
Right.
And I just snapped, and it was a really cool accident. Um, but yeah, I reckon like 5,000 a day or something like that, a couple thousand a day.
Hmm.
And then I whittled it down to like, I think like 20,000 selects, and then like 2,000 like photographers' favorites,
Right.
which I gave them everything, but I always sort of like make sure there's a folder where no one's like blinking or like
Right.
mid-sentence. And then there's a folder I'm like, if you're going to use a shot from this scene, I think this is the best one. So I always I've learned the hard way, because whenever I like just give a client all the photos and they kind of like randomly pick out of it, and you're like, why would you choose that one, not the really
Yeah.
nice one?
Right. No, and there were a couple scenes you were costumed as like an extra
Yeah.
with camera in hand too, which I thought was really cool. You're in 2 scenes
Yeah,
like
there's
that?
the 70s showroom, the International Hotel. They put me in a costume and these really high heels. I had to have my sneakers under the table because I'd jump up on stage and then hop back down between takes. Uh, but yeah, that was so much fun. They dressed all the extras like characters. Like they had this
Yeah.
whole wardrobe situation. I have a really big head, so I always had to have like the leftover wig that was in my size, which weren't always the cutest haircuts on me, but we worked with it. Uh, but yeah, and then the 50s, the Westwood, the camera, the Leica camera I was using hasn't changed its design since the 30s. So I just had to turn off the digital review screen, and then I could be on camera with it. So, and they'd get like, they dressed it in the 50s one with like the old fashioned flash and everything. But yeah, that one was allowed to be on camera, so they could get me pretty close to shoot like right in Austin's face, which was fun.
I mean, you're huge into fashion, and
Mhm.
this is. I didn't know how you ended up getting the job, so that's super cool that it was like, yeah, I'm here to do this, and now I've really stumbled into, after showing what I can do, I'm being given
Yeah.
the reins to really have free range on a set and just and you're shooting with people. I mean, you're shooting with like Austin Butler, you know, who like
Yeah.
that's an easy person to photograph, you know, like you've got this really cool opportunity in front of you. But as someone who is obsessed with fashion, seeing some of these photos get put into Vogue and Prada, like what is the emotional feeling seeing your photographs printed in fashion magazines that I'm sure a couple years earlier you were just rifling through looking at going,
Yeah.
this is amazing.
It was such a special feeling. And it sort of does, I get a bit of like imposter syndrome a little bit where it's like, oh, I can't believe like you chose my photos for that. The first photo they released from the movie, I'm pretty sure, was the one of Elvis and Priscilla that got released in Vogue, where they're like sitting on a green rug. And that was, I didn't know they were about to release that. And it was on my birthday that it got posted. So that was a fun little coincidence, nice little birthday present.
I saw that you posted your favorite photo from the movie. It's from the
Mhm.
carnival. It's Austin. It's what we've described. It's very soft foreground, and then Austin's like in very crisp focus in the center. Why does that photo specifically stand out to you as your favorite? Because I mean, again, you're taking 20, you know, thousands and thousands
Yeah.
of photos. What is it about that photo that really stands out to you?
I loved, it's funny you mentioned Stanley Kubrick earlier. I really like how purposefully he uses foreground. And I sort of had to jump out of the way of the shot uh, to be where I was standing there. And then I was like, oh, I may as well, like, he's sort of getting this like bounce on him that's lighting him because that shot they were shooting was from behind him. Um, so I like fiddled around with the settings and snapped that moment. And I was like, I love this picture. I think it looks like a painting. And Austin's quite into photography as well. So oftentimes, like, the photographers would always show him because he would like cut and then he would like pose. My camera had a mirror in it so you could hear it going. So he'd always kind of like give me a few shots before like we'd have to roll again or something. Like he really was easy to work with in that sense. Um, but I just remember we were all like, wow, that was such like a lucky, that's what I mean. Like you kind of get pushed like into being like, we can see your like hand or something, you kind of have to duck. And then it's like, oh, these guys standing in front of me. I really like that foreground. The colors in the background are so interesting. So it was sort of like one of those lucky, I felt like I was like in the perfect frame for my style of shot. So I loved how that photo turned out.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit more on the Kubrick side because you said something that's interesting.
Mm,
But before I do that, I have to ask you one more Elvis question, which is
yeah.
you sat in front of, I mean, like you said, it was like real life concerts. There's all this footage that I know was shot that didn't even make the movie. What was your favorite location to be shooting in? Because you had these incredible sets, incredible locations, the practical locations, like massive cities being built for this movie. Like, what was your favorite place to shoot, and why?
I did like the carnival a lot. It wasn't even a real carnival, like it was completely a facade. The rides and everything were operational, like the extras were actually on the chairs for ages and
Doing
everything.
30 takes, just spinning in a circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was such a fun, Catherine Martin is such a talented, like she's so cool in the world she builds. So even that fake carnival was like, this is the most fun carnival I've ever been to. Like just how much detail goes into the stalls and the like circus acts behind the scenes that he walks through. It's just like, so it was like a visual feast to photograph and like the lighting was so cool there. Like it was just like such a fun place to shoot. And then energy wise, definitely like the Vegas scenes, because like we were talking about before, people were dancing between takes and like everyone's sort of whistling like the songs and everything. Like they get stuck in your head, but in like a good way. And they're just so high energy. And like I was saying, like the crew like bought into the energy. So it sort of helped make it you feel like you were behind the scenes. And that was I really liked those days that we were doing Vegas shows or even like the tour around America was just like they were doing these really quick costume changes and then he'd sort of do the concert and then we'd run off and then we'd do it again in a different costume. Like, it was just so much fun.
I wanted you to expound a little bit. You mentioned Kubrick intentionally using foreground, and it's
Mm.
something I'm a huge Kubrick fan. I mean, like goes without saying, I feel like everybody that's into this stuff has to at least tip their hat to Kubrick in one way or another. But he's not someone I think about a lot utilizing foreground. I can think of like Full Metal Jacket, he uses it a lot more than some of his films, but he shoots extremely wide shots. Like he's very much into composition where it's like, here's our center of our frame. That's usually where whatever we're supposed to look at is right there. And then like this kind of symmetry, all around it. When you're thinking foreground in his films, are there any scenes in particular that stand out to you? Because that's something I definitely want to look for. And it's something again, like outside of Full Metal Jacket, I'm like trying to think of scenes where I'm like, that's interesting how he uses foreground to paint his picture.
Yeah, I noticed it in A Clockwork Orange primarily. I think he uses the art direction as framing really nicely. Like things feel really purposefully
Mm.
placed within the frame, but not in a distracting way. I have his street photography book, which I love from when he was like living in New York, finding moments before he got into film, which I
Yeah.
think is really interesting that
He
he
was
was
like
like fine.
17 or 18, I think, when he was taking a
Yeah,
lot of those. Yeah.
yeah, and that's so his framing even then and like finding those moments, which I have fun with as well. I really like even after you shoot, like going through and picking the moments that you
Mm.
want to release or you want to give to the client, I think is a really fun part of the job. I really enjoy being like, look at this like moment in time, frozen forever that I captured for you. Uh, so I really appreciate his eye in that sense. And going through his book even before a shoot, or like some photographers on like Instagram and stuff, I think is so cool at finding natural framing. And I always like reviewing their Instagrams and their profiles before going on because I feel like that puts me in like a mindset to not take the obvious photo. I had a photography teacher over like a summer course when I was about 14 who was saying like if there was a flower and you ask 10 photographers to, or 10 people to take a photo of it, that like 8 people are going to give you a really similar photo and 2 people are going to find a different shot,
Mm.
knowing that the other 8 people are going to take it like straight on full frame. So it's sort of like looking through people's work that have an eye for that because then it makes me look for the more interesting shot.
That's another great exercise is like thinking, what's the one, like, how do you be one of the two people that takes it a different
Yeah.
way? Um, I'm curious too, like you mentioned inspiration, and we I talked about trends in animation and different things, and there's definitely trends within, you know, photography, filmmaking that become popular. Use of color, not using a lot of color. Like one of the things that
Yeah.
stood out to me with your work is that you're not afraid of very saturated, vibrant photography, where I think the trend lately, I think it might be shifting a bit, but lately has been very dulled colors, very
Mm.
whatever this means, cinematic, quote unquote cinematic, kind of look where it's two primary colors and that's it. And it's very dulled out, desaturated. Um, what is maybe one or two trends you see in like visual storytelling that really irk you right now, where you're like, I hate this trend and I hope it dies? And then maybe what are one or two things that you love that you've seen in maybe older projects or when you're looking back at older photography that you're like, this should be something we bring back?
Yeah. I For the latter question, I wasn't as cautious of color when I was shooting before, and then I learned on a project where I was trying to put color back in, uh, like what's the word? Not contrary colors, but like complementary colors, the ones that are opposites of each other. I wasn't as purposeful with looking or placing things like that in frame, and then I learned in the editing process that it's so nice to have uh, a considered color palette. Um, now I know how to like put color in where it's not there. And I have to say, I really like Visco has some filters that can change a neutral color to a vibrant color and protect the skin tones.
Mhm.
And sometimes I like just flick through their colored uh filters just to like experiment around. I don't always use them, but sometimes it's so nice to be like, oh, that's like cool if that white is pink or something in the background and their skin doesn't look wonky. Um, so now I think I'm more considered with that and I have a little more fun with that. And I've definitely there's this nightclub photographer I follow on Instagram that I think does really beautiful color treatments. And he shows how he does it in post, because he's shooting in like these nightclubs that have like, the colors,
Right.
it's kind of like a muddy environment, and then he boosts these tones, and the color palette that he uses, I think, is a really tasteful uh, palette. So I've sort of been leaning into that a little more. And I think for social media, people like vibrancy.
Yeah.
They always like blues um, on like a grid, I feel like people always like, but I just try and make them, especially for Elvis, because that is such a rich, uh, textured film, that I think it's nice to lean into that lighting. Um, so yeah, I've sort of just leaned into pushing colors a little bit more recently. Obviously, depends on the project. It doesn't always suit it.
Right.
Like I just did like a bridal shoot where they obviously don't want funky colors
Right.
distorting their designs. Um, but I slipped on like the post I did yesterday. I used one of those visco filters, I think, and it's an all white room with a white dress, and it made the background like a little more blue pink toned. And it's not something I'd like give them because they're not going to use it. But for my like, I know people like the colors they use and everything, so I was like, this is fun. Like I think it makes it like a special photo.
Yeah.
A trend I don't love, I don't know if this is a trend, but I think people just not maybe knowing the camera settings. I hate when people's like skin looks crisp. Like, when people get the really high definition cameras and they just
Yep.
want like the clearest photo possible. And it's like you can see every pore, every like hair on someone's face. I really don't like that. I kind of prefer a glowy, milky look for skin textures. So I really don't like this. Like it's like the iPhones now, some of them like on FaceTime and everything, you see your
We're like,
face.
oh
It's
my
like,
God.
why? Yeah, why would I ever want to see that?
Right. Right. No, that's funny. I have a friend of mine who used to do photography, and and we were doing a shoot, and we were talking, and he was like, I feel like the first step when anybody becomes a photographer is they like go to Lightroom, they go to the sharpen tool, and they just
Yeah.
go to 100. And like, and it is funny because it's something like it looks really good when you're starting, because you're looking at, you're like, I've never seen my pictures look this crisp before.
Yeah.
And then you go back and look, you're like, oh my God, like you can see every pore and every wrinkle and every and I'm guilty of that, like the unsharp mass and the sharp, like all of that. I think when you start, you just got to put yourself in jail and say, I'm not pushing any of those things or moving any of those knobs. um I'm curious now. I know we're getting near the end. I have some questions I ask everybody that comes on the show,
Yeah.
and I'm really curious to hear your answer. They're a lot more film centric, just to film as a whole, but I'm curious to hear
Yeah.
your answers. First and foremost, what do you think is the best decade of film history?
Oh, the thing, maybe just because we're talking about Kubrick, but I remember one of my coworkers when I was like interning for free at some production office was saying that they really liked Stanley Kubrick in the 80s, because now obviously that's really mainstream, the style that
Right.
he was doing, and it's very familiar to us. But at the time, it was very like Breakfast Club, like those kind of more kitschy films, and he
Hmm.
came in with this really unusual, kind of jarring aesthetic. And I think the same with like Baz and like Jordan Peele and there's other filmmakers that they do something you haven't seen before, and people kind of balk at it because they're like, what on earth is this style of storytelling? And
Right.
then everyone rips them off
Right.
afterwards because it was different, it was cool. So I think that shift in the 80s from almost like a harmony between a kitsch fun vibe and then like a really grand, serious, considered, like that they lived in the same world and were popular
Hmm.
at the same time, I think is really interesting.
I mean, the 80s is a really interesting time because you had that grit of the 70s for half of it. And then you had that, you know, like you said, the bombastic or the goofy, kind of John Hughes style.
Yeah.
And for those to coexist is really fun. But it is kind of, it's the same way I felt, with all the Marvel films being popular now. When I watched Babylon, I was like,
Mhm.
this is such a breath. It's a weird movie to say this. It's a breath of fresh air to see this very like
Yeah.
gritty, over the top, huge, pushing boundaries kind of style against the backdrop of like we've gotten PG-13 animated, superhero movies for like the last decade, this is a really cool change of pace. But yeah, I love that answer. If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why?
I've actually thought about this before, like if I went back in time and a movie hadn't come out yet and I could have the like good idea to make it. I almost feel like I wouldn't take it away from some, this is me going back in time, but
Right.
I feel like if I like remade Inception or remade one of those movies, I would do it differently and why it's not the same movie. Now, same thing now. I feel like when it's successful already, it almost doesn't need to be redone because people love the original. If there was
Right.
like a good, I feel like my answer would be like a movie that I thought was a really good idea and was badly executed. I don't think I would make something or remake something that I like.
Yeah. I had somebody, I think it was somebody on the show. It was either off, I don't remember if it was on mic or not, because I don't want to throw them under the bus, but they said like Godfather. And
Oh, whoa.
I was like, okay, that's an interesting choice. But I think their instant reaction, I think they even said that. They said my instant reaction is to say like my favorite movies, like
Yeah.
because that would be fun to work on. But yeah, I think when you really think about it, it's like, what's that good idea? Like for me, there's a movie called Death Dream that came out in like the late 70s, and it's about a Vietnam vet that they think is killed in action. He comes back, but he's, now he's like drinking blood. He's like very changed. It's a commentary on war, but in a kind of decaying zombie kind of movie. And I think it's really interesting, but it just literally didn't have the budget to do all the things I think it could have done. And so I would love to see that, redone in a cool way. But there's little movies like that here and there. You're like, if we just
Yeah.
push this way just a little bit, we've got a masterpiece on our hands. Um, for you, what of your projects do you think is the best representation for you as a creator?
Oh, I feel like film-wise, the last shot I did, we didn't have audio recording for the first, like, it was a 2-day shoot. We didn't have audio on the first day, so we had to take dialogue out of the script. And it was like
Mm,
a 5-minute music video, sort of visual poem style. And I think I actually did really well with having the characters, because a lot of it is them on their own. And obviously, that doesn't sound interesting for someone to be like thinking the whole film. So we worked really hard, my producers and I, to make sure that the 5-minute film, you could sort of read like that director I was saying that did that Puberty Blues
mhm,
70s Australian show, showing the story instead of telling it. I think
right.
if I do say so myself, I think I did a really smooth job of it. And there's things I would change, obviously, now with like hindsight and seeing the final cut and everything, but especially the ending, because there's like a conversation that you don't hear, but you see. And there's sort of a stomach drop moment at the end and then the film finishes. And I think that open-endedness of people having to put their own dialogue in and
Mm,
own that was purposeful that we wanted that to be the case, but that's sort of the storytelling that I like is when you leave a film and you're like, what do you think happened here or what?
mhm,
And there's like a obviously like a canonical answer that the filmmakers meant, but I like that discussion where they leave it open to discussion with a correct answer, if that makes sense. So I think
oh,
I'm trying to make sure I continue to keep doing that instead of leaning on characters telling you things. I think I did it. I'm not gonna like pat myself on the back too much, but I think I did a nice job on that. And I think I discovered that that's the style of storytelling I liked with that
no.
film.
Yeah. You said something else interesting. You've said a couple things throughout this. I'm like, that's really interesting. I've never heard it said that way. But I love ambiguity in film endings. Like, and I know a lot of people don't. I know there's a lot of people
Mm,
that do not like when it doesn't telegraph exactly what you're supposed to know at that time. But I think what you just said was interesting, where, when the filmmaker knows the answer, but the audience can speculate, and I think
yeah,
that's the difference is like, I've watched movies where you can tell the filmmaker doesn't know, so they just left it
yeah,
open. And I think those are the ones that are frustrating. But I love the ones where, you'll see interviews with filmmakers 20 years later and they'll say, well, I know, but I'm curious to know
yeah.
what the audience thinks. That's really funny. Um, your new animated short that's coming out, if you had to program a double feature with it, what would be the film that you would pair with it?
Oh, probably Coraline. I think it's very Coraline Peter Pan. It's like mid-century 1950s Gothic horror, which I don't think I've seen before. We've tried to find like specific references, and I think we're meshing together some cool references, but I think it would pair well. It's very on par with if you liked Coraline, I think you'd like this one.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see this. The more we talk about it, I'm like, I'm ready. Let's check it out. Um, what is a film that people would be surprised to know that you enjoy?
Oh, I have like an embarrassing answer that's like my whole family's hot take that this is a good movie. And not even like as a filmmaker way, it's just like I always watch it when I'm sick and we're always like this like holds up. But the first Diary of a Wimpy Kid live action I think is so funny. Like I think that's like my like comfort film that I actually think it's genuinely well written and
Hmm.
like I know that's like a weird answer for that because it's not like some art house thing, but like genuine gut answer. Our whole family is like, this is pretty funny.
We all have those. I love 27 Dresses, so like we've all got those
Yeah.
movies that stick out. Who do you think is the most underrated artist working today? This could be someone in any
Oh,
arena. It doesn't have to be just photography specifically, or it could be a director. Most underrated artist.
ooh, underrated. I think it's harder. I'm going to go photography centric. I think it's harder to break in to the scene now that people have like established social media presences. And before, it was so much easier to find really cool, talented photographers because they were popular on social media.
Yeah.
And now I keep stumbling across these profiles. Like they come up on my like um is it a For You page on Instagram, like the Discover page,
Yeah.
or I'll follow someone, it comes up as a suggestion. They only have like 200 followers, and it's like the most beautiful work I've ever seen. I find so many, I always screenshot people's profiles to like make sure I go through it and give them before I follow them because I just don't want it to get like eaten into my feed. It's like I want to go through and like make sure I like the photos that I like for them and like
Mm.
because I feel like it is such a like I learn from people on social media and I don't want it to feel like weird ghost like where I'm
Right.
not
Yeah.
or it's like I'm almost like I'm like gleaning from them without acknowledging them or something.
Mm.
So like so much of my camera roll is me being like, oh my God, next time I'm like in a line or something, I want to go through this person's profile and like actually check out what they're doing. So I think there's so many artists uh online that I'm hoping do get traction and I hope they get work and everything. But I think this yeah, social media photographers, I think not like content creator style, like they're like actual photographers,
Right.
but yeah, there's so many that I love that I think I'm like surprised that they don't have as big of followings as some of the other Instagram famous photographers.
Yeah. Love that idea too. Taking a screenshot and like going back. That's cool. Last question. We've got 2 minutes and this could change
Yeah.
someone's life. So if you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring filmmaker who's listening to this, what would it be and why?
I think someone told me you have to make things and you have to just, even if it's not as good as you meant it to be, like everyone's fine with your next project being better. And you, like, I think it sounds worse to be like, I nailed it, couldn't do anything better. And then when you go for jobs, you can actually show things. And I think the same thing with the removing yourself from it, that if people are hiring you, they're not going to be like, oh, they're nice. Like they can be the photographer, they can be the director or something that's actually like you have to have confidence in building your creativity and practicing and doing what you love. If you love doing it, keep doing it, get your portfolio together and just do it. I think there's no reason not to just do it.
Yeah, love that advice. Well, Ruby, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm very, very excited to see your short film in February. In the meantime, what is the best place for people to keep up with your work?
Yeah, on Instagram, my username's at Ruby Bell, RubyBell. I have Twitter at Ruby Rose Bell. I have YouTube. I try and keep my pages semi-active because so people can engage with what I'm doing. But Instagram's probably my most used one.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. If you're listening to this episode, be sure to go follow Ruby everywhere and go like some of her photos and keep an eye out for future work. Ruby, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.